And so the question we should now ask ourselves, what are the indicia? What are the metrics for determining credible elections? Broadly speaking, globally, there are two broad metrics. First is what we call process indicators. Under process indicators, then two, we have outcome indicators. Process indicator will determine the level of participation, whether there was competition, and whether there was outcome. Then the outcome indicators will also show whether if the vote actually reflected the will of the people, and if there's a post-election adjudication, has that been properly determined by the court of law? We'll come to that issue of court of law. That's my constituency. I am worried of the expanding empire of the courts in determining who becomes the winner of election in our country. The winner of election must be determined finally and conclusively at the polling unit and not in the court of law. There are a few lessons to learn from the United Kingdom. Now, other process indicators, because there are three phases of elections. The pre-election stage, this is where we are at the moment. Then the election itself, then post-election. The pre-election phase where we are right now is so critical because if election will be peaceful, you will see from the process of planning. In terms of what happened with political party primary, first it started with registration. But thank God we'll come to that. By the time we came on board, in 2010, there were things that we have done that ordinarily, the moment, because election rigging, manipulation starts with voter registration. That is where the process starts. But we have never, since politicians have learned to fly without perishing, the commission was able to develop process and procedure without also missing. And that's what we did to deal with that aspect of pre-election crisis. But where we are right now is the pre-election stage. The first thing you must know, we must ask whether election will be credible, will be the legal framework. What is the legal framework that will govern the election? The sanctity of law is very key to election management. Just as we talk about the perception, because perception is very key. Whether those who are managing the elections, whether other critical stakeholders are neutral, they are impartial, they are professional. It's very key. In fact, 70% of election management is about perception. If we get the perception wrong, we are in trouble in terms of our actions or inaction. So the legal framework, very key. And number two is the issue about existence of a credible register, which the commission has successfully achieved. Then, but far important is the fact that, and I wanted to put something on the board. There's a pyramid I'm going to show to you on the board to demonstrate to you for the 10 years we were in office, just like the chairman and the commissioners. On the day of election, they are only going to be mere supervisors of election because election really are conducted by the rest of Nigerians. And I will show something, you should put something on the board to demonstrate that to you. And so that even assuming without conceding that everybody in INEC is bad, the question now is, yes, there's a pyramid. Now if you look at this pyramid, so that we can speak to it. You have the chief electoral officer, which is the Professor George, at the top. Everything is planning right now. At some point, they will move them to the states, INEC state offices. At the INEC state offices is an exchange of batting. The commissioner and his staff at the head office will take everything to the local governments. From the local government, we have the SPO down to the base. They are Nigerians who are not part of INEC process and procedures, who were basically recruited barely a week before elections. They are the one, because the moment you hand over the ballot paper, the result sheet and all that thing to, at best, SPOs. If I SPO, they also take it from other federal agencies. from that stage down to the bottom, they are Nigerians. Because the chairman of INEC, the REC, the EO, on election day cannot sign any document on election day. They are only supervisors. This is where your job, our job, becomes very critical. Strong supervision. And that is why, as I drive down, is the provision of section 134 of the 2022 Electoral Act that some of us addressed the press in 2022 have been again repeated in the 2026 Electoral Act. We said that any omission by SPO, work election officers, presiding officers, that is contrary, that is not contrary to the Electoral Act, can be ignored. That is to say that every instruction, directive given by INEC to all of these categories of staff will not lead to the violation of election. That is why election rigging is very rampant, because they are aware of this. I'm going to show some other provisions. And so, to have such a provision repeated against section 134 is a tragedy. The 2022 Electoral Act represents the most progressive piece of electoral legislation in our history. Regrettably, that has been watered down by the 2026 Electoral Act. I speak today not from theoretical point of view, as someone who spent 10 years, and I basically crisscrossed the entire country conducting election, having practical experience on the basis of which some of these things were done. Now, with respect to the outcome indicators, here we have programmed our election to be going to the courts. We have learned nothing from the United Kingdom. For a period of 99 years until 2010, there had never been a post-election education in the United Kingdom. Even the UK that introduced Nigeria into election rigging. There's none until 2010, when the Liberal Democrats had issue which was taken to the court. This was because of their own peculiar experience. Because the United Kingdom and America were the most notorious country for vote buying in the 18th century. And so it took, at that time, the court in England was not to entertain election petition, because politicians were buying everybody in England. And the fear was that the court of law would be captured. They would take over the court. And at the moment the court is captured, democracy is in danger. Because what gives viability to democracy is the rule of law. The only arm to which all must bow must be judiciary. But the moment the judiciary shows sign of collapse, weakness, irrelevance, or succumb to the intimidating and suffocating influence of corrupt politicians, democracy is in peril. And that is why ab initio in England, they don't attend it. Because all petition goes to the parliament. But because of the fact that in parliament, there was no electoral justice, it came to a point where it was agreed that, look, you know what? The courts should now attend to election petition in England. And the idea was that they decided deliberately to protect the judiciary, was that every election law must be interpreted purposefully, strictly. And that's why in England, politicians are afraid of judges. They are afraid of the court. But in Nigeria, those who will rig election, those who will manipulate, and they won't tell you to go to a court, they have no regard for my constituency anymore. That's a lesson you must learn from England. You can try that in the United Kingdom. And so that is what you find with respect to process indicator and outcome indicator. Now, the whole embrace of democracy is essentially because it brings about participation and accountability to the process of human development. In fact, it makes possible the reality of the law of anticipated reaction in election management, which says that what has controlling effects in a politician in public office is not about the last election, but the fear of the next election. But where, either through the law or the process, politicians now feel that they don't need the vote of the people. The fear of the people will no longer be there. And that is why in United Kingdom, other jurisdiction, public opinion is so critical in sustaining their democracy. But right here, public opinion is gone. And so, we must know that achieving credible election requires multi-stakeholder responsibility. Or the following key stakeholders. You have the INEC at the top, saddled with responsibility to midwife democratic competition. Number 2, you have the judiciary. And number 3, you have the security agencies. And I am happy that many of you who are here today, and the part of the latter part of my lecture, you will see how our effort over time have ensured that you play your role impartially and professionally as security agent and all that. Then, of course, political party, candidates, the civil society, voter, and the media. But the truth of the matter is that the trinity of INEC, judiciary, and security will address Nigeria electoral issues. The trinity of these 3 key stakeholders can resolve most of our problems. Because once the umpire stands tall and mighty in defense of the process by not allowing himself, either as a presiding officer, assistant presiding officer, all the levels I have identified, you don't see themselves as an errant people, because an umpire must not be an errant person. You must stand for the national interests. You must not surrender the core values of impartiality, of neutrality, and professionalism. I must underscore your work. But once all that are undermined, then of course you are not likely to have a credible election. Now, with respect to the sanctity of law, public trust, which is almost gone in our country today, because once that distrust is there, no matter what you do as an umpire, no matter what you do as a security agent, no matter what you do as other key stakeholders, the people will not take you seriously. And that is why our actions, our words, our actions, in our inactions, the things we do or fail to do, we must maintain the highest principle of ethical standards. And where those who have been called upon to keep public trust are failed to do so, then of course, certain actions must be taken. Fundamentally, there are 3 principal frameworks that govern election in Nigeria. The Constitution. Section 160, INEC as a body is a creation of the Constitution. The Constitution, the Electoral Act, regulations and guidelines made pursuant to Section 160 of the Constitution, as well as Section 148 of the Electoral Act. These are the principal laws that govern the conduct of election. In 2010, why I said I feel frustrated about our country, when we came on board under the Jega leadership, we had done advocacy for the right thing in our country for over 20 years. And so when we're now given opportunity, after all, I turned that offer ab initio. It was the former Vice President, late Mike Ahibe, who placed a call to me that you cannot reject this type of assignment. You have been advocating. Come and do the job. Join your boss in ASU. I was president of Student Union at the time. And we came on board. When we came on board, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing we did was to identify election rigging provision in our act. Do you know that there was even in the 2010, the previous 2012 Act, there were provision for the use of thugs in our laws. There were provision for the use of thugs that were put in there. When lawmakers now make law to protect their own interests because they are in office. And so when we came in, we identified Section 49. What does Section 49 says? It says that a presiding officer at a polling unit, once a voter comes before him, If he's satisfied, that's the language. If he's satisfied, that is the person, he issues him ballot paper to vote. That's what led to massive rigging. Remember, we're doing manual register. They just write with the biro and all that. Section 53, with respect to determining, overvoting. It was based on total number of registered voters. That was used to rig elections. Then, of course, you have section 68 of the Act, which says that all these categories of persons that are shown on that pyramid, that the decision of a returning officer shall be final, only subject to the court. So from day one, all the politicians needed to do was to go and buy returning officer. You remember in 2019, returning officers were hiding from one place to the other. They will disappear, and so on and so forth. That's what they were doing, because they knew that INEC had no longer control anymore. It must go to the court. Ladies and gentlemen, it took us 20 years to persuade the National Assembly to remove these provisions. And that happened in 2022. Remember that before the 2022 Act was reluctantly signed, it will be rejected 4 times. Do you all remember that? It was rejected. And it was eventually signed. So you now have section 47, which is a new one, again from 49. We now have section 51, and we now have section 65, which says that where the return has been made out of due process, administratively, INEC as a regulator of elections in Nigeria has the power administratively to review it without having to go to court. That is section 65 we now have. All of these things were done to give meaning and purpose to the ballot as the best means of the expression of the will of the people in democracy. The basic issue that had to do with credible election had to do with these processes that I've outlined. And that's why I spent little time to explain to Nigerians that, look, recall, we came in to deal with that section 49. We have to do separate voting, separate time for accreditation, and separate time for voting. You all remember what happened in 2011. Then from there we migrated to the smart card reader in 2015. And in 2015, to tell you that as INEC is planning, politicians are also planning, trying to look at the process, how to going to bypass the process. In 2015, we now said, look, we need to identify people having successfully, because Jega leadership was the first who success. No, we didn't start it, but the very first successful compilation of biometric register was done under the Jega leadership, and we are part of that effort. Now, it was now decided that we need to confirm your fingerprint. That was the idea of Carida. Carida was now introduced. For the purpose of inclusivity, ladies and gentlemen, we knew that there were some Nigerians who have issues with their fingers. We now decided to have an application in the Carida to take into account those who don't have fingers. Ladies and gentlemen, the presiding officer we trained, they went to various communities. Suddenly, the whole community no longer have fingers. They were now using that application. The whole community, no fingers anymore. These were the things that he did to undermine the credibility of the electoral process in our country. And that is why the sanctity of the law will normally generate interest. You all recall, Nigerians, irrespective of what happened with respect to the transmission of the result, that public trust, public confidence was at the highest level in this country before the 2023 election. Is that not correct? Many Nigerians were returning back. I left office in 2022, but I offered myself not to take any appointment for any consultancy with anybody. And I called John Momo. I called the Duke of Delta, Duke of Abagbena. Later, my doctor said, I need your platform. I don't want to do consultancy for anybody, but to educate Nigerians on sound knowledge of what the reforms that were put in place. Because I cannot be part of those who have put this reform in place when it comes to implementation because of huge consultancy money to go and join a party. I refuse that. And that's what we try to do, to give meaning and purpose to the ballot as the best means of the expression of the will of the people. Ladies and gentlemen, the current amendment to the Electoral Act, where they have now basically dealt with so many provisions, is a tragedy to our country. It's a big tragedy. It's a regression from the threshold that we have crossed, and I will point them out here. And that's why it feels sad for our country that every election year we are discussing the same issue. we forgot that election is just a process. The ultimate goal is development. But we seem to be stuck in the issue of elections. That appears to be where we are at the moment. And so when you have a proviso, which of course was brought about regrettably by my constituency. I made a point. If Nigeria will die, it will die because of we lawyers. They will die because of we lawyers. Both the bar and the bench. Both the bar and the bench. Because Section 160 in 2010 when we came on board subjected INEC to the control of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We wrote a memo to Mr. President Goodluck Jonathan, whose victory for due process and democracy was very clear. It was Jonathan that, look, we need an unfettered freedom for our democracy to survive. Jonathan initiated the process for the first alteration of Section 160. We stated clearly that of all the executive bodies established under Section 153, with respect to the Independent National Electoral Commission, its powers to make regulation and determine its own procedure shall not be subject to the direction or control of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That was what Jonathan did and gave us freedom. Secondly, 48 hours to the election, Section 52, subsection 2 of the 2010 Act that expressly prohibited the use of electronic system in our elections. In order to give room for the use of the corridor, President Jonathan assented to it 48 hours before that election. Those were the things that we put in place as safeguards to make our democracy work. It's a student that have paid exam that should be repeating exams. I'll be asked to repeat the exam now by discussing these things that we have discussed before because they are there.